Hey, I'm Stephen Cook. Welcome to this compelling, small, 16th century circle painting, The Parable of the Wicked Tenants by Abel Grimmer, painted around 1590. I'm here inside the painting to welcome you to our VTS seminar, Bible 660, Biblical Theological Reflection on Violence. I always find students in this seminar to be highly engaged and to bring deep passions and wrestlings to the course, which makes me really look forward to it. So welcome. One of the unusual aspects of this circle painting is that Grimmer has painted the scripture verse right into the painting, down in the lower left. Matthew 21, 33 to 46. The Wicked Tenants parable is also found in Mark 12, 1 to 12, and Luke 20, 9 to 19. All three of the synoptic gospels valued this parable, despite the prominent divine violence. But long before the gospels were even written, the parable first sounded in the ministry of Isaiah in the Old Testament. The influence in Jesus' parable of Isaiah's Song of the Vineyard, Isaiah 5, 1 to 7, is just obvious. The wording of Isaiah's Song of the Vineyard rumbles through the parable from the start. Here in this circle painting, we see Jesus' reliance on the so-called violent God of the Old Testament. Jesus accepts and revives the divine violence of Isaiah's vineyard song. In the song, God tears down the spoiled vineyard. In Jesus' parable, the vineyard owner evicts the wicked tenants from the vineyard and takes their lives. When a prophet like Isaiah speaks of God violently pummeling the vineyard Israel, Jesus does not demur. The God of the Hebrew Bible is Jesus' God, and vice versa. No Marcionism. The lectionary rightly pairs the two vineyard texts, Isaiah's Song of the Vineyard in Isaiah 5, and Jesus' parable of the wicked tenants that we see in this painting. Here in the painting, Grimmer refers us to Isaiah's song by depicting the vineyard, down below here, as dry and unfruitful, a feature of Isaiah 5, but not of the gospel parable. Jesus is surely thinking of the Hebrew prophets and all of their prophecies of threatened judgment against an unfruitful vineyard in describing the string of servants, of messengers, that the landowner sends to confront the wicked farmhands. And since Jesus is the vineyard owner's son within the parable, Jesus numbers himself in continuity with that whole string of Old Testament messengers, the prophets. What is more, Jesus refers to himself and his messianic advent in this text using the Old Testament metaphor of a despised and rejected stone that ends up smashing the evil farmhands. This is a pretty violent Old Testament Jesus. Just as Jesus, the rejected stone, and the landowner's heir is inside the very parable that he's telling, Grimmer has painted Jesus inside his artwork. Grimmer places the Jesus group here with me in the foreground on this bluff, and he dresses the group in classical clothing to distinguish them from the parable's characters, the characters of the story, who are dressed in contemporary 16th century garb. With such thoughts and such enigmas, our seminar begins its work. Here we have key questions. Isn't there enough violence and pain in our world without having to read stories about pummeling and destroying vineyards throughout Scripture's two testaments? In a post-9/11 world, haven't we all agreed not to use language about God having enemies like these sociopathic farmhands? Don't we all agree that any sort of talk of divine wrath and violence is foreign and repulsive? If Jesus' God is wrathful, can we commend the worship of this God? If we dare so to do, How do we as faith leaders prevent texts such as the vineyard parable being used to justify or even sanction violence? Should not we best leave all such biblical texts alone or even censure them? In the end, isn't it best just to stick with the Sermon on the Mount? No. Can we envision a constructive divine violence? This is the question of our course. Can we begin to reconcile God's unfathomable mercy with an appropriate view of divine wrath and a sophisticated understanding of redemptive violence? This is our course's question. The parable of the wicked tenants offers some hopeful signs, I think. Signs that progress is in fact possible. After all, the parable very effectively appeals to our fundamental instinct that an ideal universe should be both just and merciful. The egregious, murderous, sociopathic evil of the farmhands is an outrageous affront, calling for nothing less than a devastating response. We feel in our bones overwhelming consternation when Jesus or Isaiah tell this story. Of course, the vineyard owner has no choice but to come and clean house. I mean, even when you love someone desperately, it is far from a loving thing to leave them be in what they are making into a stinking, barren vineyard that can only finally bring misery and death to everybody, inside and out. But beyond this, the vineyard paradigm reveals God as suffering dishonor, suffering violence far beyond a normal landowner, sending messenger after messenger, hoping against all hope. God is struggling to restore relationship with the farmhands at any cost and to put the vineyard back on course. And God even sacrifices God's beloved Son in the attempt. That ultimate violent sacrifice of God reveals the fullness of God's loving commitment to the flourishing of God's people. Our course has good scriptural material to work with, and I think we're going to have a very good and rich and spiritual time wrestling with this material. I look forward to it. Welcome.